I'm George Milton, director of Henry IV, Part 1. So it's considered in the category of Shakespeare plays as one of the history plays, about a whole section of English history and the trials and tribulations and the strife of warring factions and civil unrest, and frankly, that's not the part that interests me. Shakespeare's, as we all kind of know, wasn't really that good at history. So there's a lot of inaccuracies about it for those of you who like to get excited and sort of unpack the real history of Richard II and Henry IV, and leading all the way up to Richard III, who was the most maligned of Shakespeare's historical figures. That part of it is, one, inaccurate, and two, is about a history that's not our own. So what I get more excited about is the way he tells his stories. As not so good of a historian as he is an incredible storyteller with really great characters and really great moments and theatrical decisions that go on in the course of this play. And he has rooted this play in some very universal and fundamental motifs in sort of the human story. And this one, Henry IV Part 1, is a real coming-of-age story about the young Prince Hal, who at the beginning of the play, our play, he has indulged in his youthful rebellion, as so many young teenagers go through, rejecting what his family, his expectations and his society expectations, and has been indulging in his frivolous, freedom-loving, breaking the mold type of lifestyle. And the play begins ostensibly with him reaching that crossroads moment of decision, of needing to make a decision between indulging in that freedom or acknowledging the path of his family responsibilities and who he is born to be, destined to be, and who he has to mature to become. And that's something every one of us who's been a teenager has gone through, of wanting to define ourselves and our own identity, but also knowing that that is not necessarily that desire, while it shapes the humans and the adults that we become, to fully indulge in that is not a path to adulthood. So Hal is in that pull between Falstaff, who represents this freedom and excess and libertinism, and that path of just saying, throw it to the wind and live the bohemian lifestyle and become a beatnik and a hippie or a punk rocker or whatever it might have been, and having to follow his father, who is the king, and knowing that he's got a family, blood relations, and obligations there, and that he is going to be inheriting essentially the family business of ruling a country and the obligations and the maturity that requires. And that's the crux of the story, and where our play begins for the most part. Rooted in that also, which makes Shakespeare such an incredible storyteller, is not only is that just something that we as people go through, that moment of decision, but he structures it in real deep storytelling, mythological structure. It has all of that Joseph Campbell hero's journey type of archetypical storytelling, of the hero on his quest, needing to transition to become the person that his heroic journey will determine him to be, finding his destiny, going through the trough, the transition moment, the battle, the fight to become who he will be, having the temptations to either side, the Falstaff figure being, as full of life and as exciting as he is. He's actually a destructive character. He is anti-social. What he does as a thief, as a drunkard, as a libertine is destructive to the society that the world order that is built within the structure of the play, the kingdom, the England and the future that needs to be built. And his father, who represents all of that, but is not. But it also has that wanting to break from that traditional mold and wanting to define himself as who he is. And so he's got those two pulls, and then to get through his trial by fire in a battle, to prove himself worthy of his destiny, he must face his doppelganger, his other, the figure who represents, in the eyes of many, including his father, all he wishes his son was, and that's Hotspur. But Hotspur is also a antisocial, destructive figure, as tempting as it is to think of him as the great warrior and dedicated to his family. He is part of a rebel faction that is looking to destroy the order of society that is the Kingdom of England. And that temptation to be like that has to be destroyed. That Janus face has to be separated from who Hal is seeing himself as and seeing himself through, and in order to dispel that, so that he can become who he is meant to be and who he really who he kind of was all along. That's the stuff that excites me about this play. It's the story, it's how it's told, and who the people are. So in this play we have Connor Nederson, who you may have seen in last summer's Two Gentlemen of Verona, playing Prince Hal. Very much the young, youthful, not quite who you see in Henry V, where the warrior king, the leader. He is looking to find who he is and discover that rebelliousness. And Connor is a terrific actor who's played a lot of those great young man roles for us. He was a wonderful Romeo on our touring shows. Set up opposite him as Hotspur is Joe Ngo, who is a recent graduate of the University of Washington program. He is a really exciting, fresh face that I'm looking forward to working with, and he brings that sense of who is this exciting unknown person to Hotspur, who has all of this bravado and the appeal of the exciting macho and hot-tempered, passionate type of person. Playing Falstaff, Shakespeare's greatest clown creation, is Tim Hyland, who directed a Macbeth for Woodnow a few years back, and I'm really excited to, it's my first time working with him on a project, and he's been one of our area's great actors and a friend as well for many years. Had a chance to work with his wife, Tracy Hyland, when she played Ophelia opposite my Hamlet a few years ago. So I love him and I love his family. And as Henry IV is David Anthony Lewis, who you got a chance to see recently as Duke in Othello and the Duke in Measure for Measure. So he's got this really great sort of, we cast him as leaders and rulers of kingdoms and duchies fairly frequently now, because he brings that kind of authority. But he also has a very tender and emotional side, and that comes through in Henry as well. As much as he's upset at his son for not following, it also hurts him personally as a father that he feels he's losing his son. And David has that sensitivity as an actor to not only bring that command and authority, but also the vulnerability and the hurt that Henry is also experiencing. And it's pretty exciting for me as well to be doing a history, because when I started Woodnow over 20 years ago, and now having grown up on Mercer Island, and Mercer Island is where we first started performing these Woodnow shows at this beautiful amphitheater there. One of the first thoughts that went through my head on seeing this beautiful space and thinking about starting a Shakespeare theater there was, I can't wait to do sword fights in this space. And we're going to have pretty epic sword battles for this show. We're doing it in a more or less kind of period, but I talked about Prince Hal is in this rebellious phase, and I mentioned the temptation to want to be a beatnik or a bohemian or a hippie or a punk rocker, and we're going to find ways within what ostensibly looks like and feels like medieval England to bring out that sensibilities that would be identifiable to us in the 20th, the 21st century. People, as we've matured, we went through our phases in the 20th century, or now some people in the 21st century. Yes, there are teenagers now who are born in the 21st century going through those rebellious phases. And I'm going to bring in potentially anachronistic stuff, either literally or at least in the feel, to get that sense of rock and roll, punk rock, teenage rebellion, whether it's just in an attitude and a behavior of some of the actors, or a slight changing of accessorizing in a medieval costuming, or even down to having in the music, the soundtrack to the show, things like The Clash's London Calling, or a song by Katy Perry. Those elements will be introduced into this play. Thanks for viewing this. I look forward to seeing you all in the parks this summer. It's going to be a good one.